Welcome, Vijay Prashad. Thank you so much for joining.
It's a pleasure. Nice to be with you.
Wanted to ask you about this very prescient article that you wrote at Globetrotter. The United States uses a fabricated drug charge for a potential strike on Venezuela. And then lo and behold, that potential strike became an actual strike. So tell us what made you write this article and then how it intersected with reality.
Well, the writing of the article was pretty simple because I was first struck reading the US government's, order to increase the quote unquote bounty on the head of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro Moro from 25 million US dollars to 50 million US dollars. And actually, this was widely reported. But what was not reported as much, and that struck me as odd, was that there was a reason given in the U.S. government order of why the bounty had been raised, and if you looked at the reason given, it was pretty interesting. What was the reason? It was argued in this U.S. government thing that Mr. Maduro was not just the president of Venezuela, but turns out, according to the United States government, he's a head of a drug cartel. And that was interesting. Well, what's the name of the drug cartel? Well, if you look into that, which I think most people didn't bother to look into, it's interesting because the idea was that he is the head of a drug cartel, which is a made-up name. It's utterly made-up name, a cartel of the Suns. Why is Cartel de los Sols a made-up name? Because in 1993, a Venezuelan journalist wrote a couple of stories saying that some high-ranking people in the military and in the counter-narcotics force, by the way, this is 1993, this is a good 6 years before Hugo Chavez comes to power. So this is when the previous government of the center-right was in power. This journalist says, well, on the Venezuelan military uniforms, there's a sun. Right. So because these two Venezuelan high officials were involved in narcotics, he sort of tongue-in-cheek called them Cartel of the Suns. It's not a real thing. It's just a made-up name. Okay. Then when Mr. Chavez died in 2013, the very next year, Nicolas Maduro was running, to be re-elected, or rather for the first time to be elected as president on his own steam. When he was running, these anti-Chavez journalists based in Miami there were two books that came out where they basically said, well, there's a cartel called the Cartel of the Suns, drug running cartel, and Mr. Maduro happens to be part of this cartel. So that was in 2014, 2015. Nobody really paid attention. It's garbage. I've looked at every drug enforcement agency report since 2000, downloaded the PDF for free, scanned through it, also did searches and so on. No mention of Venezuela in any way. Most DEA reports, which are pretty accurate, say that 80% of drug traffic comes on the Pacific coastline, not through the Caribbean. It's mostly from the Pacific, leaves Guayaquil, it leaves from Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, goes up to Mexico, and then to California. That's the route. Anyway, there's no mention of Mr. Maduro as being part of the Cartel of the Suns. This disappears. Suddenly, in this US government bounty sheet, it says Mr. Maduro, the bounty is raised to 50 because he's the head of Cartel of the Suns. Doesn't exist. There is no such cartel. Okay, so the first issue is that this was bogus. And then right after that, the US government moves 7 warships and 1 nuclear-powered submarine to sit just at the coastal limit of Venezuelan waters, just sit there. Very threatening posture, looked like Operation Brother Sam, which the US used in 1964 off the coast of Brazil. They just sat there, waited for the Brazilian military to overthrow the government of one João Goulart in 1964. That coup lasted like 24 years or something. And so I thought, well, I would like to write about how this is a fabricated cartel. And then lo and behold, as you say, United States fired a missile at a boat with about 11 to 18 people. Boat sank. Everybody disappeared. No evidence of drugs. Who knows?
Really insane to watch this happen. And here actually is a video. Let's play this video of Trump announcing the strike from the Oval Office on Tuesday.
When you come out and when you leave the room, you'll see that we just, over the last few minutes, literally shot out a boat, a drug-carrying boat, a lot of drugs in that boat. And you'll be seeing that and you'll be reading about that. It just happened moments ago. And our great general, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who's been so incredible, including what took place in Iran, knocking out potential nuclear power for a long time to come. I think within a month they would have had it if we didn't do what we did. But he gave us a little bit of a briefing, and you'll see. And there's more where that came from. We have a lot of drugs pouring into our country, coming in for a long time. And we just, these came out of Venezuela and coming out very heavily from Venezuela. A lot of things are coming out of Venezuela. So we took it out, and you'll get to see that after this meeting is over.
Okay, so that's his announcement. Then let's take a look at the footage, alleged footage of the actual bombing, which, by the way, Venezuela is saying was AI generated. So there's the boat for people who are just listening.
Yeah. By the way, it's not just a boat. It looks like a Boston whaler.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's incredible. I mean, you see this, I don't know, I guess he thinks that people are impressed with that image of that thing exploding in the sea. I, of course, find it really disturbing. And of course, like, there's no evidence to back up that this was shipping drugs. So what's your response to this announcement and also to the actual video that was released by the White House?
Well, firstly, there are drugs pouring into the United States. There's a huge market for drugs, including fentanyl. There's a huge market for it. Deal with that. You know, it's a public health crisis. It's in fact a social crisis. Needs to be dealt with. People need to find a way to be happier. You know, pain relief is not a good idea. You know, you got to find ways to deal. I'm not saying tough it out, but why are people so addicted to painkillers and so on? That's a social crisis in the United States, a demand side crisis. Okay, that should not be underestimated. Secondly, there are drugs coming in. They're coming in from serious drug cartels around, not only in Mexico and in Colombia, but in other countries and in the United States. You know, when the US government deported large numbers of Salvadorians, this is long before Trump, from Los Angeles to El Salvador, they brought MS-13 from Los Angeles to Salvador City. It was a Los Angeles gang that was taken to El Salvador. You know, the Cartel de los Narcos used to be called Los Zetas, is a cross-border cartel. You know, it's not just in Mexico, it's a US cartel as well. Deal with all that. You know, that's a US problem, frankly. That's not a Venezuela problem or a Colombia problem. The campesinos who grow cocaine are not responsible for the fentanyl crisis, frankly. You know, even the campesinos in Cauca who grow poppy are not responsible for the fentanyl crisis. That's an American problem. So I want to just put that out there because, Katie, that's important for people to digest. Secondly, the Drug Enforcement Agency, a US agency, has made it very clear that the drugs coming out of Venezuela are either minuscule, there are some, but minuscule, or it's often Colombian gangs who take the drugs across the border to Venezuela to warehouse them there. So they're not really drugs coming out of Venezuela. They are the big Colombian paramilitary, you know, drug cartels that exist and so on. So there really isn't a big drug trafficking move from Venezuela to the United States. That's the second point. I mean, I'm just taking the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime and the Drug Enforcement Agency reports, just those, not even looking at anything from the government of Venezuela, just US government reports. There is no real traffic from. Thirdly, if Mr. Trump believes that a boat that's a sort of oversized Boston whaler is carrying a huge amount of drugs, he's never been on a boat. That little glorified dinghy
Yeah.
could not be carrying more than 5 minutes or 2 minutes of Houston's drug consumption. Okay, I mean, forget United States drug consumption. You need to take out like a cruise ship to
Right.
make a dent on the drug trade. Okay, and a lot of the drugs are being flown in still into the country. A lot of drugs come in big shipping containers. They're not coming in small boats like this. This is a joke. Yeah, I mean, I scoff at this, whether it's an AI generated image or not. It's a ridiculous image. If anybody looking at this thinks, "Wow, we just made a big dent
Right.
in the U.S. drug consumption," then you don't understand how much drugs is the volume of drugs being consumed in the U.S.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it almost looks like a fishing boat. It's so not threatening looking, and it's so not sufficiently large to carry a significant amount of drugs. What do you think people need to know also about Tren de Aragua? Because you talk about that in your article as well, and that is such a a fear mongering word term, alleged gang that gets thrown around. So what do people need to know about that?
Well, look, Tren de Aragua is the kind of it's the sort of Caribbean version of Al Qaeda. It's everything and nothing. There was a time when the United States was accusing governments in South America of harboring Hezbollah. It was like an insane idea that somehow Hezbollah has developed a multinational capacity to strike at the United States from Mexico. It was like a hallucination. And you had U.S. senators having press conferences saying, Hezbollah is in Mexico and in Venezuela, and so it's a complete hallucination. Tren de Aragua is your classic example of a street gang, which was created by a real ruffian whose name is Nino Guerrero, a real classic street gangster. It was created in a prison in Venezuela. The guy was in prison in the Bolivarian Republic. He was in prison in the state of Aragua, and there was some sort of gang activity, and maybe this gang was even formed. Okay, I have some doubts about whether this gang actually exists now. The Maduro government cracked down on these gangs, threw a lot of these people in jail. In jail, they built kingdoms. So in this particular prison, they had a zoo, they had like a fancy restaurant. I mean, prisons were out of control for a long while. The prison guards couldn't enter. These prisoners took them over. So then the government came in and tried to retake the prisons. Nino Guerrero disappeared. He has vanished. In fact, I live in Santiago in Chile, and there's an extradition for him, because there was some thought that he had come to Chile with the 500,000 Venezuelans who are here, that he's hiding somewhere in Chile. He is the Bin Laden, but in fact, not really, because Bin Laden actually did things. He actually organized 9/11. Sorry, you guys who don't believe that's true, but even Arabs can do things. They can fly planes into buildings and so on. Don't take agency away from the Arabs for doing terrorism. They have Bin Laden is capable of things. He's not a dupe. So anyway, so at least Bin Laden was. This guy is a gangster, and that to a kind of. I use the word petty, Katie, but I don't mean petty in terms of a small-time gangster. But he's a thug with small horizons. This is not the kind of guy like Pablo Escobar who knows how to organize a massive global enterprise for drug running. He doesn't come with any of that background. He's never demonstrated this potential. When you talk to people who have read files on him, they will all tell you that, look, this guy is a thug. He built an organization inside a prison. He's got a mean streak. But I don't think these people know how to organize a big transnational business. Yeah, I doubt that it's a flourishing enterprise. Anyway, when the gates opened in Venezuela, a lot of these gangsters left. They went through, Central America. A number of them showed up in the U.S. It's true that Caracas is an extremely safe city now, because where are the gangsters? They are in South America or they are in North America. They're not in Venezuela. There's some truth to that. We shouldn't completely set that aside. But it's not a big gang like the Jalisco cartel or the the Cartel de los Nortes, the former Los Zetas. These are real cartels. These guys have multinational corporations. They launder money through. You may have seen the big scandal at Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, HSBC. The terrific book written about it called "Too Big to Bail" or something like that. Which is about the role of HSBC in Mexico, how it was laundering drug money at the US-Mexico border and so on. Fascinating book, fascinating story. But this group just doesn't, there's no evidence that Tren de Aragua is anything other than a bunch of crooks who got tattoos, call themselves a gang, but never rose to the level of a transnational corporation.
So that, of course, doesn't mean that we won't be seeing increased actions from the United States, right, against Venezuela. In fact, here is what U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had to say on Wednesday on Fox. We've got assets in the air, assets in the water, assets on ships, because this is a deadly serious mission for us, and it won't stop with just this strike. Anyone else trafficking in those waters who we know is a designated narco-terrorist will face the same fate. So what do you think this bodes?
And to hear the rest of the interview, please go to usefulidiotspodcast.com.